out of Ohio, Ross McNutt, the president there, offering a system which uses 12 commercially available Canon cameras mounted in an array as an effective alternative cheap enough for local law enforcement to afford. He typically charges between $1,500 and $2,000 per hour for his services, including flight time, operation of the command center, and the time that analysts spend assisting investigations. The Supreme Court has given wide latitude to police using aerial surveillance as long as the photography captures images visible to the naked eye. And he claims that they can do this for much less money than a police helicopter would cost. From the airborne cameras, each person appears as a single pixel, indistinguishable from any other person. What they're doing, whether they're clothed or not, it's all impossible to see. But he hopes to have cameras in the future that will be able to spot individual people from 7 miles away. The AP reports that more than a third of Americans worry their privacy will suffer if drones like those used to spy on U.S. enemies overseas become the latest police tool for tracking suspected criminals at home. Nearly half the public, that is 44%, support allowing police forces inside the U.S. to use drones to assist police work, but a significant minority, that is 36%, say they strongly oppose or somewhat oppose police use of drones, according to a survey. 24% fell in the middle, saying they were somewhat concerned about a potential loss of privacy. One man says he Googled his house, saw his car sitting in the driveway, says you can read the license plate number, and you can see inside his living room, you can see the pictures on the wall. He says, if I had been standing there in my underwear, you could have seen me. Google says it tries to blur out those images in the Street View feature, but it just goes on to show the dangers of this type of technology. Back in 2012, the Supreme Court restricted the police's ability to use a GPS device to track criminal suspects. The court, without dissent, agreed that prosecutors violated a certain man's rights, that is Anton Jones, in a landmark ruling on the Fourth Amendment when they attached a GPS device to his Jeep and monitored his movements for 28 days. Justice Scalia wrote, "We hold that the government's installation of a GPS device on a target's vehicle and its use of that device to monitor the vehicle's movements constitutes a search. Law enforcement could have avoided the issue if they had followed the warrant which allowed the GPS device to be installed in 10 days rather than the 11. Let's go to the radio land and the callers out there and see what they have to say. You can find us at facebook.com/Liberty or Death Radio. Call into the show at 1-800-FREEDOM. All right, we got Katie on line one. Katie, thanks for calling in. I just wondered what your comments were. What are your thoughts on the aerial surveillance that we've been discussing here? Is that something we should be giving police the power to do, just to look at us and be able to have this huge area they can cover? Obviously, you can't see great details, but what do you think?
I really don't agree with it at all. I think that giving anyone that much power of surveillance is very dangerous, and I think that there would definitely be abuses of that power, and I don't know if there would be ways to check that. And so I feel like that is not something, I can understand when in war situations when that is acceptable, but that is against our Fourth Amendment right.
It does seem so. Now, obviously in this one case, they had someone who had robbed, I think, a lady walking down the street, and then he jumped in a vehicle, and they were driving away. They were able to track them for some time. There's real potential, it seems like, also to be used for good. What do you think? Is it worth the cost there? We could...
Well, I think that, it sounds like it's a great idea, but everything can sound like a great idea on the surface. I think that when you get a little bit deeper than that, if there was some possible way to make it so that they could only use that kind of surveillance in, like, life or death situations or something like that, but I feel like the chances of them being like, they could totally take advantage of that, and every person who jaywalks, every person who, does this, does that, I think that it gives somebody a lot of power if they're able to see everything you can do.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And unfortunately, it does seem like the American public doesn't seem to recognize the dangers these days because they stay in such a state of fear, with the war on terror. There's a war everywhere you look around. You got the war on drugs, you got the war on terror. And so if you got a war, you obviously got to have soldiers, you got to have equipment to fight the war, and you got to make sure you're keeping an eye on all the enemy.
Right.
so there's no doubt. If you look at that from that paradigm of the war all the time, and everybody's an enemy combatant, then you obviously have to keep them under surveillance. You have to make sure that they're dotting their I's, crossing their T's.
Right, right.
But I think we do have a different view of the American people. I certainly know as myself that it's important to preserve the civil liberties that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a state that can give everything, takes it away as well. Moving on to the GPS tracking devices. This was one example here was a landmark Supreme Court case. Anton Jones, basically he was a nightclub owner and convicted in a sense of dealing drugs. The police had actually used a GPS device on his vehicle without a warrant, and the Supreme Court actually said, hey, you can't do that. You've got to have a warrant to use those GPS tracking devices. Do you think that's something we should give government the ability to do? Take, for example, you can't get a warrant unless you have probable cause, okay? So if you have reason to believe that somebody's committing a crime, but you can't prove it, not probable cause, or not enough to rise to that level. And I'm not an attorney. I don't know, exactly what it takes to have probable cause. You have to have 60%, 70% evidence, to prove. Do you think we should just give police the ability to put those GPS tracking devices on?
I don't think they should be allowed to do it without a warrant because I feel like, again, that's a very slippery slope. You have to trust in your government and the police to make sure that if you give them that ability, then you have to be able to trust that they're not going to abuse that power. And I feel like that's just not something that I would want to trust anyone in.
Right.
So I don't think that, I think that they should be, getting a warrant. I feel like you can make up any excuse then if you don't get a warrant,
And I think that's true. And, definitely even with a search warrant, these are not difficult to get. Okay. I've had some experience with this. And, when I look at the flimsy evidence that's given for a search warrant, and I see the magistrate, okay, no problem, just put the paper here, I'll sign it. It's like, wow, are these civil magistrates doing their job? Are they really vetting the evidence presented to them, and are they giving a warrant, based on, this is definite evidence that there's a probable cause for a crime being committed? Or are they just saying, no, police officer wants a warrant, no big deal. The police officer might as well just sign it himself. This is why we had the, the prohibition on this sort of thing, by our founders. They said, no, you can't have Americans signing search warrants like the British did, to come into houses and search for contraband. That's just not going to allow that. We have to go through the due process. And it seems like this is almost getting circumvented now. And if we were to take that restriction of the warrants out of the way, it does seem ripe for abuse.
Well, I think the other interesting thing is just how blatantly they disregarded what the law was when they did it anyways. Because I know that in the case it said that they had up to 10 days to put it on the device on the car, but they did it on the 11th. I just think that the laissez-faire attitude with that says something about how trusting we can be of just giving anybody that type of power.
Yeah, well, it's the government. We got to be able to trust them, right? Okay. Hey, thanks for calling in, Kate. Appreciate your comments.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to Liberty or Death Radio, Episode 6, covering local police surveillance. You can find me online at danielrayrichdson.com. Call into the show at 1-800-FREEDOM. We're discussing also Next Generation Identifier, or NGI, a new database that the FBI is working on currently. The NGI biometric identifiers will include fingerprints, iris scans, DNA profiles, voice identification profiles, palm prints, and photographs. The NGI database may include photographic images provided by individuals to state agencies for the purpose of obtaining a driver's license. Also, children in several school districts are now required to provide biometric identifiers, such as palm prints, and are also subject to vein recognition scans. Boy, they're pulling this even on the children in the schools. The DHS Fusion Centers are where federal, state, and local law enforcement combine their efforts to combat real or supposed terrorism. They collect data from many sources to seek to find trends or tips to lead them toward persons who may commit a crime. But these are also potential problem sources as they warehouse so much information on so many people. What if this data gets into the wrong hands? What do our callers have to say on these important issues? So we got Evelyn on line 1 calling about the NGI, the Next Generation Identification Database. Do you think it has potential hazards to our privacy?
I think it has both. I would feel safer, I think, personally, if they would have the tools. However, I think there needs to be a lot of regulation, which I don't think that they have yet, on how and what to do if it is misused. We already have to have our handprint, palm prints done to enter into some of the hospitals for payment of programs.
Okay.
That's already taken effect. The eye scan and the facial recognition, you already see it on TV, so you know it's coming.
Sure.
I think that's the government's way of preparing us for this. I don't really see how we can really avoid it.
Okay.
We have a large mass of people, and this is another way to control it, to control immigration. I don't believe the system is really perfect, but I believe it's got to be started somewhere.
Okay.
I know this was started several presidencies ago. It's already here. They're sneaking it into our lives by TV.
Yes.
To get us to accept things already. It's already in use.
Right. That's definitely true. I mean, there's no turning back to technology. But if we're going to have, we should have definitely oversight regulation. Who do you see doing that? Do you see a government agency doing that, a bureaucrat? Do you see Congress supposedly taking this up? I mean, to me, Congress is not doing their job of overseeing the agencies now.
I don't think it's Congress.
You don't think so? Okay.
I personally think it should be made in a group of people who would be like the government group. I think it should be somebody picked out of the private sector.
Okay.
And I also think somebody out of the public sector.
Okay.
Not just private sector, but public as people to oversee. That's sort of how I feel like to form a committee from all these.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, if we're going to have these sort of things, we've got to have some stopgaps there to take care of the invasion of privacy that could possibly occur. Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate your call this evening, and thanks for calling in. Okay, we got Kenny on line one. So, Kenny, we've been talking about the DNA samples, DNA gathering, and just wanted to see what your thoughts were on this. It's a Supreme Court decision, I think, from back in 2013. And 5-4, they said that police may take DNA samples from people arrested in connection with serious crimes. Federal government, 28 states, authorizes process. And the interesting thing was Justice Antonin Scalia had a strong dissent. He actually spoke from the bench about this decision. He said that the point of DNA testing as it is actually practiced is to solve cold cases, not to identify the suspect in custody. And he also further commented, make no mistake about it, because of today's decision, your DNA can be taken and entered into a national database if you were ever arrested, rightly or wrongly, and for whatever reason. Now, obviously, DNA evidence is sometimes used, I think quite often used these days, to solve a rape case, to solve different cases, and it can, obviously prove someone is guilty or prove someone is innocent. I mean, I think there's people that possibly been executed, and I think not just possibly, but have been in prison wrongfully. And This DNA evidence could have been taken and said, hey, this is not the right person. So just what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you think it's something that we should be giving government the ability to do, take this DNA, without permission of the person, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those deals where there's always an excuse, if you will, or always a legitimate reason to take away one more kind of nibble away, if you will, at the Constitution. And the fact is, this decision, as the one judge already pointed out, is not just trying to solve a murder. This is typically something that's brought at a position where they're just trying to identify the person, which, once again, it sounds unreasonable. We want to identify this guy, but once again, what if they've been arrested in the wrong way?
Right.
We should never give the government that kind of responsibility because just because you slap a badge on somebody doesn't make them righteous and moral, so you can't just allow the government to have the power to go ahead and collect this kind of, especially DNA. I mean, there's no other way, no better way to identify you, and you start collecting bulk database of DNA, then I mean this is some pretty crazy implications. So definitely a negative thing. Kind of thankfully the one judge did trying to go down guns blazing in a sense of trying to say, look, this is crazy. Yes. I mean, what are you going to do? It's frustrating, and hopefully somehow because this took place, we can see some light brought to the subject, and some people can stand up and say, what are we doing here? Right.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Very good. Well, we appreciate your thoughts today. You take care there.
Hey, you too.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Thomas Jefferson preferred the stormy sea of liberty to the calm of despotism. I agree. With Patrick Henry, I say, give me liberty or give me death. It is time to draw a line in the sand and say no more secret spying. No to no more closed-door sessions on how to protect